Bonsoir à tous.
Bonsoir.
Good evening, everybody.
Alors, ce
Good
soir, nous
evening.
vous
So
accueillons dans
this
un
morning,
studio,
this evening, we
on
are
va
in
dire éphémère, puisque
an
nous sommes installés au
ephemeral
capital de
studio.
réunion
We're in a
de
meeting
PB2.
room
Merci
of
à Trinidad de
PB2.
nous accueillir.
Thank you for the
Parce
subsidiary
que nous
for
sommes dans le
hosting
bâtiment
the
qui accueille
meeting. We're in the
Opaline et bientôt
building
la
that has
holding, en pleine
Opaline and the
rénovation
holding.
énergétique.
So it's
Et donc,
being
avant d'installer ce nouveau
renovated from the
bâtiment,
point of view of
nous allons faire
energy.
une lumière
So
à partir d'ici.
we're going to be
Patricia
doing
va
the webinars from
démarrer
here
par les salariés. Nous
for the
t'écoutons,
next
Patricia.
few months. So let's listen
Oui,
to
donc,
Patricia.
merci
Yes,
Nicolas.
thank you very much.
Première slide, donc
So the
première
first slide,
transparence,
first
exactement. Donc nous allons
page.
en fait, nous avons une bonne nouvelle
So we've
puisque
got good news.
à fin mars
At the
2022,
end
nous
of
avons
March
25 personnes qui
2022,
nous
we've
ont
got
rejoints.
25 new people who have
Et
joined
donc,
us.
nous leur souhaitons déjà la
So
bienvenue.
welcome to them.
Nous sommes contents de
And
cette
we're
intégration.
happy
C'est en
that
lien
they've joined
avec,
us.
la croissance,
So this ties
constatée, en fait,
in
en
with the
2021,
growth
et nous
that we
avions,
saw in
communiqué sur le
2021.
fait que nous avions des
So
recrutements en cours pour renforcer nos équipes
we told people
qui
that
vont
we were
travailler,
recruiting in
très
order
fort
to
en
back up our
2021
teams, to
pour faire
reinforce
face au
our
volume.
teams in
Et donc
2021 so that
25
they could
personnes supplémentaires. Et
rise
donc,
to the
on
different
peut s'en
work
féliciter,
volumes.
se dire
So
que la marque,
we're very happy.
employeur
This
de
means
Thermador Groupe
that
et de ses
the
filiales,
Thermador Group and its
porte ses
subsidiaries,
fruits et nous permet
the
de
brand
convaincre de nouveaux
has been working
candidats de
well,
nous rejoindre.
and we've been able to convince new people to come and
Je vais
join
passer
us.
ensuite sur,
So I'm now going
sur
to
le
move
chiffre
on
d'affaires
to
2022,
the
donc à fin mars
turnover at the
2022.
end of March
Nous avons un chiffre d'affaires
2022.
qui est en
So
croissance de
it's up
12,3%.
by
Une bonne
12.3%. So
réalisation
that's
qui est dans la
a good
continuité
performance. It's in
des
line
chiffres d'affaires
with
enregistrés
the
sur les derniers mois de
turnover for the
2021.
past
C'est
months of 2021. So 12.3%. So this ties in also with inflation. It has to be, which is 4.3%. So that's what we're seeing also in the first quarter. So you can note the activity, the consumer channel, it's slightly down by 5% compared with what was recorded on the consumer market. We'll see the brief statistics later on. It also shows that there is a drop by 5%. There's nothing worrying when it comes to the consumer business. If we compare it to 2019, it's an activity. If we compare the 27 million, so we were growing at over 28% compared with what was recorded in 2019 compared with 2022. So that it's a good start to the year, even if we've got this decrease of 5%. It also needs to be compared with the changes in purchasing power, and we'll hear more about that from Guillaume when we talk about the consumer channel. So the professional channel is rising by 70%. So we already had that in the last quarter of 2021. So it's a continuation of that. So that's a good start. It's the same for industry, the international market, and the building market, which is continuing to be boosted by renovation and the measures taken in terms of energy renovation. And we can see this through the results of different subsidiaries, Thermador plus the 35%, with Isocell that also benefits from the effects of the energy renovation, plus 47%. And we can also underline the good performance of Accélère, which is growing by over 24%. That was at the end of March. The Accélère team moved in the first quarter to its new premises. So they took over their offices, and already in terms of the warehouse for February, so the business is growing, and they've also moved premises. So we can congratulate them for all their work in the first quarter. We can now move on to the next slide and talk about organic growth. So this slide shows us the turnover for different quarters over the past few years. So the first observation is that in 2022 and 2021, we were growing, and already there was a lot of growth compared with the previous year. So this means that we've got a good trend for the first quarter. So the graph also shows, we're going to be talking about mountains, but we've got a quarter one figure that was great. So we had benefited from precautionary principles applied by our customers. They wanted to stock up to avoid price increases. So the quarter one 2022 is also very strong, and Guillaume will talk about the estimations, our anticipations for performance for Q2 2022. Now, the next slide gives some indicators. So just as a reminder, we've got different indicators for the consumer channel, for sanitary, heating, air conditioning and plumbing. And we also have data for new housing and industry. So the FNAS and Bricobrief. Bricobrief is what I explained earlier on. So we are seeing a decrease, -5%. But if we look at that decrease, it was already present over the past quarter of 2021. And even since May 2021, we were seeing this decrease. So there's nothing really worrying about that. It's in line with what we'd already observed, in fact. So now, if we take the FNAS, where we're seeing a growth of over 9%. So sanitary equipment, plumbing, heating, that needs to be compared with the activities of our subsidiaries in the building sector. And we can see that with the 17.4%, we can see that the performance is better than what we can see on the market. Now, energy renovation also contributes to this strongly. So the next slide gives you the curves for new housing, both for housing units that are authorized and housing units that have started. So we can see that the housing units that are authorized continue to go up, and that's at the end of February 2022. And what we're also seeing, but this was also the case for the previous months, is that houses units that have started that had kind of stagnated, the gap, in fact, is getting bigger. This can be explained by several phenomena. There's the scarcity of labor, for one. There's a shortage of materials. And also, there's something else, inflation. So we've got considerable price increases on the market with financing that is extended or postponed, and so construction sites that are started a little bit later on. So just to remind you, the subsidiaries that are impacted by new housing are PB Tube and Thermacome. So you can see that the variations in turnover of these subsidiaries is growing for both subsidiaries with a good performance from the Thermacome. So we can now move on to the statistics for industry. So we have an index for the end of February 2022, so that you can see that we're over 50, so we're on the up and up compared with the previous month. So we're still seeing improvements compared to the previous months. We're not yet seeing the effect of the war in Ukraine yet. It's not yet visible. But this will probably be more marked at the end of March. But whether we're talking about France or Europe, so Europe with our Safeco activity and Sudeco, so we have activities, we have an industry with good performance compared with others. So I'm now going to hand over to Guillaume, who's going to present to you the highlights and prospects for the coming quarter. So concerning the building sector, we're very optimistic because the public powers have committed to support energy renovation, at least over the next 5 years. So we have lots of products to supply for this energy renovation. So accessories for heat pumps, solar panels, hydropower, so solid fuel boilers, but double flow ventilation systems as well that has the wind in its sails at the moment. But in the longer term, we've got radiating ceilings, which are a specialty of Thermacome, can be a great alternative to air conditioning. On the other hand, if we talk about new housing, as Patricia said, there's a lot of uncertainty, and we are expecting figures with impatience. Hopefully we will be able to maintain the new construction sites, but the increase in prices will put off the payers, those who are paying for the housing. It's an increasingly more expensive reality. Now, industry, as you know, our market share is lower in industry in France. It's already the case. Abroad, internationally, it's even more so the case. So we've got some good prospects on this market. We've also got this year 2 new ranges for Spherico and Sectoriel, Sudeco, Algae Inox. These companies are also able to increase their sales with extended ranges. But there are some clouds, there is some uncertainty. These price increases, and I'll go into them later, can slow down investments of industrialists. Now, let's talk about export. The situation is a lot better. Again, we can go and visit our customers, and that's the best means of conquering new customers, new products. Here again, there are a number of uncertainties. Now, we're pretty sure that there will be a slowdown in countries that are close to Ukraine, so Belarus, for example. They're historically linked to Ukraine. And the risk of economic slowdown is a real risk. Now, the consumer channel, clearly, we're not expecting growth on this market from our subsidiaries in 2022. So 2022 is a year for consolidating our market share, our market position, and it's about organizing. We need to now get organized in order to face the increases that we've been seeing for the past 2 years. Now, one point that's very important on this consumer channel is that of purchasing power. Purchasing capacity is going down in France because of the energy prices. And so, obviously, this means that decisions about products will not be necessarily in our favor. Now, in China, we have a number of suppliers who've seen factories closing. What we're seeing, though, is that these closing operations are fairly short. We're talking about 2 or 3 weeks, so not really much longer. So this means that the delivery times are extended, but this is compensated by our stock levels. So there's no major concern today with respect to China, especially because the situation can be very diverse depending on the region, and our suppliers are spread across the region. And our purchasing teams, nevertheless, are keeping an eye on things so that they can let us know of any problems if stock gets low. Now, the war in Ukraine, we made a press release on that subject to say that the direct impact in terms of turnover will probably be about 1 million euros. So that's fairly limited, therefore. We haven't really developed any business in Russia. Some customers have. And so the turnovers are going down. But there is a lot of indirect impact, and I will talk about the shortage of equipment, materials, and inflation a little bit later on. Now, supplies. Let's talk about supplies. What we're seeing today is that in China, we're managing, nevertheless, to supply our factories, even if it's taking a bit longer. What we're seeing in Italy, for example, keeping in mind that Italy for us is the cradle of products for building energy renovation operations. In Italy, our suppliers are rising to the challenge in spite of the shortage of materials. So the problems are relatively limited today. They're limited to a certain number of materials, for example, things that contain semiconductors. So for material with semiconductors today, we can see that things are coming very, very slowly. The market is slowing down, but it's the same for all of our competitors as well. Now, inflation. Patricia mentioned inflation already. It's going to be high in 2022. We're pretty sure that it will be above the average from last year, 4.3%, and we commit to telling you the level of inflation at the end of the first half year. We will give you we will make a precise calculation. But the price of containers is going down, so that's good news. So there's a drop of 30% in container prices. So, but of course it's relative, this drop in prices. But what we're seeing is higher prices from our suppliers. The first price hike, well, we applied it to our prices, and we will be seeing new increases over the course of 2022. Now, there are some things that are good for our margins. The professional channel is weightier compared with the consolidated figures. So this means that there is more stability on the consumer market, and this professional channel is historically produces better margins. We're still we've still got 110% of capacity, which is very good for the operating margin. So that's a very positive point. But the dollar is not in our favor. The exchange rate is not in our favor. We're looking at plus 35% when we're buying in dollars. And the repetitive price increases obviously are going to lead to a loss in sales margin, because it's extremely difficult to, have our customers cover them. Now, concerning acquisitions, we're still very active internationally. We've got some very specific ideas about the kind of company that may join us in the future. These companies are rare. They're not necessarily up for sale straight away. So it involves a lot of, it's for the long term. In France, regularly we're contacted with respect to opportunities, and we're looking into those opportunities at the moment. And we're paying attention to them. Let me just repeat what Patricia said concerning the second quarter that's just starting. Last year, the progress was exceptional for the second quarter in 2021. So that's what we've written in the letter to the shareholders. We're already satisfied with the progress, which is similar to that of the quarter one in 2021. So we mustn't expect at the end of the half year to have an increase in turnover that is identical to what we're seeing in the first quarter. So that's it for the presentation, and so now we're open to any questions that you may have, and I can see that there are already some questions, and so I'll start with the question raised by Gérard. He's asking, what are we delivering in terms of heat pumps? So the generator, that's not our job. It's delivered by manufacturers of heat pumps belonging to international companies. But all of the accessories that allow to install heat pumps are part of Thermador's catalog. So valves, purge systems, expansion valves, buffer tanks, all of those things, for example, or settling tanks as well, things that relate to heat pumps. All of that equipment is offered by Thermador. There was a question that we noted with respect to heat pump supplies about shortage. Are we still seeing shortages? Yes, manufacturers of heat pumps are also seeing supplies come in very slowly, and even if they've got good production capacities, but they're not meeting market demand. And so there are shortages of semiconductors, for example. As I mentioned, they're very real. The major manufacturers of semiconductors in the world are interested in much bigger markets than the climatic engineering market. But, heat pump suppliers are managing to supply equipment, otherwise we wouldn't have the scores that we have. Now, Raymond is a stock exchange expert. He's asking us about the stock exchange rates. Well, there was a drop of €2 this week, and that's due to the dividends that you saw in your account yesterday, probably. So there's nothing abnormal about that. And then, within the space of a few weeks or a few months, we went from €106 to a rate at €90 after paying the dividend. So that drop is relative, and it has to be compared with what's happening on the markets, with the geopolitical events. And I think that this drop, I find that this drop, and this is my personal opinion, it's fairly moderate when you look at all of the uncertainty, and I cited a number of examples of uncertainty earlier on. There's the shortage of components, there's COVID, there's the war in Ukraine. All of these events are extremely anxiety generating, but the market is proving to be fairly resistant. So stock exchange investments at Thermador are for the long term. So we have no concern about the rates, the stock exchange rates. There's a question from Matt in English. Can you talk about your ability to pass on prices to your customers? How often can you do it? And how do your customers receive these price increases? So the question is now being asked in French. So our ability to pass on these price increases to our customers, well, the best illustration is when we look at the margin that we have, our sales margin over the past 10 years. We can see that that margin is very stable, you know, whether there's inflation or not, whether there are variations between the euro-dollar exchange rates, we're seeing real stability. And so this really does illustrate our ability to pass on these price increases to our customers. What we need to keep in mind is that this ability is a bit different depending on, you know, the channel, whether it's the professional channel or the consumer channel. For the professional channel, it's much simpler. And we need to think about our market share when it comes to professional purchasing. For the consumer channel, so DIY superstores, so it's not as easy, I have to say. However, the frequency, well, we managed in some years to pass on to our customers 4 increases. Last year, I think some of our subsidiaries passed on to our customers about 3, some 2, and some of our subsidiaries decided to publish catalogs without any prices, because these price increases were so frequent that at the end of the day, you know, the customers' price is confirmed by a telephone call, or so. Of course, it's not up to the holding to decide on these things. It's our subsidiaries who are in charge of their pricing policy, their purchasing policy. So, and that's in line with the reality of what we see in the field. So there's also a question about the opening of the group to new ranges of products. Are you being asked by your customers or prospective customers? If yes, in which sectors? And thank you again and well done. Well, thank you, Xavier, for the congratulations. It's true that we do have some ideas in France when it comes to fluid circulation products for building. So it's a very broad theme. We do still have some ideas, so we're going to keep them for us for the moment, for ourselves, so that there's no jealousy. And in terms of organic growth, we can add ranges that we don't have. So if we look at the ranges that we have on the market, we can create maybe a new subsidiary. So we've got some ideas about that. So these are the projects that we have in the pipeline for 2022. And there's another way of getting into these niches, and that's via acquisitions of companies with additional or complementary products. So it's something that applies especially to industry, where the ranges are almost infinite with many niches and many specialities. So I'd like to take this opportunity, after answering Xavier, who's an investor who's known him for a long time, I'd like to take this opportunity to say hello to Matt as well. He's listening to us from the United States. an American shareholder who has been following us for many, many years and with whom we have some great friendly relations. It's a real pleasure for us to have them with us for the webinar. Matt has another question when it comes to the margin. Can you talk about the margin and the negative outlet and the positives? What is the net impact? What does it look like? So how can we measure the impact of on our margins, the trends when it comes to raw materials and the euro-dollar exchange rate? If we look at 2021, we talked about inflation at 4.3%, but mechanically, in fact, we had a margin that went from 36% to 36.2%. So it was 0.2% the impact, so a very small impact. So after that, we are seeing an acceleration when it comes to concerning the start of the year. So mechanically, we might anticipate a slightly higher effect in the first half year. So what I want to say to Matt is that we're waiting for the end of the first half year to give you a precise vision of the margin, because it's very complex to calculate. You can imagine it's complicated. So 16 commercial subsidiaries, 73,000 items, price variations all over the place for purchasing, for selling, variations in terms of currency rates. All of these things have to be taken into account. Let me say that I'm more optimistic at the beginning of the year with respect to our ability to keep the very high margin, because 2021 ended with an operating margin that was very good. And I will say that the circumstances today are pretty good from my point of view. But we need to be careful. We haven't yet all of the effects of the crisis. We're not seeing them all yet, and that might deteriorate the situation. And then you've got the mix of businesses. We've got businesses that are more that contribute to the margin more than others. And when we look at 2021, we noted the contribution from energy renovation to the margin. So we can already measure that in the field, and we will continue to look at that in Q2. We will look at the subsidiaries with a high margin, and we will look at whether they continue to grow. Has Thermador moved? Yes, that's Blondine. That's Blondine's question. Blondine knows the warehouse and Thermador in its building. And it's true that today we can't manage all of the logistic flows at Thermador in that building. And so, it's about, it's difficult to manage all of the stock. So we're thinking with an external firm that's going to be helping us with the logistics. We're thinking about a new solution in terms of the building, the logistics for the Thermador subsidiary. That's one of the projects for 2022-2023. Thermador will not be able to continue to stay in a building that is obviously too small for it today. And in terms of the offices, Thermador Groupe will leave the Thermador team space because it's all a bit tight. So it's complicated. So in fact, we've been able to rent a surface area in the same street, and that facilitates the transfer of stock from outside to the main stock. Pierre is asking us whether, because we've got big stock, a lot of stock, whether we can increase our margins during the next periods. No, we're not going to play with that. We're not going to play with that with our customers. The price increases are quite substantial. It's very difficult for our customers and very difficult for the customers of our customers. So we can't get them to accept that. So, we've got a lot of stock, and that allows us to dampen the impact of the price increases over time. But no, we're not going to try and gain more margin. And remember, for the sales margin, the loss was just 0.2%. So probably this year, because of the wave of price increases, it's probable that the commercial margin will be challenged. Yes, and our customers often buy directly from factories. So for the consumer channel, for example, this is the case. And so they have a good notion of price increases and the variation in currency exchange rates compared with, for example, the Chinese currency. So we have to be very careful, when these price increases take place. We measure them. We've got market share that we need to keep hold of. So it's a difficult exercise, and it's managed by our subsidiaries. And in the previous years, a lot of top quality work was done in this area. A question for you, Patricia, in French, because that's your speciality. Not French, the question. So you talked about unfavorable parity between the euro and dollar. So what is your recipe? What is your recipe for the euro-dollar exchange rate? Well, the amount is known. At the end of December 2021, we had communicated about the dollar amount for the first quarter. It was $24 million that we'd bought. So we continue to hedge, therefore, where we've been very vigilant, very attentive. We've done internal purchasing, and so we're covering a period of a maximum of 1 year. So we're not hedging the Chinese currency. Maxime would like to visit. Maxime says, I'd like to visit a production site. And so taking shareholders to suppliers, it's not something we've ever done. We're a distribution company. What we can do, what we can show to shareholders is, for example, at Sectoria, we can show the, how motors are put in place, how they're assembled. It's very complicated, but we can't really talk about production. So visiting our warehouses, our facilities, it's something that we organized with individual shareholders a few years ago, and it's true that it's a request that comes back again and again, and we could organize things in the coming years as well. For those who can come to Lyon, it's always a pleasure to see them, and it's a very specific event, but I can't commit because 2022 is already quite busy. I think it's a good idea for 2023 or for other coming years to have individual shareholder visits. I expect that Maxime is an individual shareholder. There are lots of films as well that present our sites. It's the case of Accélère. I think it's the case for FG Inox. What is the market share in Switzerland? This is a question that comes from Mel. Well, the market share in foreign countries are not communicated for the moment. At group level, they're fairly limited figures. We visit, we deliver to over 50 countries. So the market share, the export market share is something like 11%. So it's a market share per country that is fairly modest. And yet, we have customers in Switzerland. Safeco has customers in Switzerland, ILO. Anyway, I've run out of questions in French and in English. I have no more questions either, says Patricia. It is 6:33. Patricia and I are out of questions. So let me just take this suppliers. Let me just say hello to our first Califi supplier. We were with them no later than yesterday. I'd like to thank them for their hospitality. You know what the Italians are like when it comes to hospitality. They're very good at it, and this is the case of our supplier. They have a very serious approach. They're very professional. They want to invest and deliver the products that we need, especially when it comes to energy renovation. So salutations to this great supplier. And Patricia is showing me something from the shareholders' letter. During the board of directors meeting on the 5th of April, Guillaume's term of office was renewed. So this is a group event that needs to be mentioned. So Guillaume was appointed CEO and member of the board for another 4 years. So with all of my thanks, not just to the shareholders, because they renewed my term of office as a director during the General Assembly, but also thank you to the Board of Directors for their trust. Well, there we are. I think it's time to leave you. So it was a bit shorter today, which is just as well, because it's a big weekend, it's Easter weekend, and so have a lovely weekend and see you soon for the next results.